So here's what I'm doing in this paper. The series is called "Why Do People Believe Weird Things?" And that's a question I'm going to answer. But I'm going to devote probably 2/3 of the presentation to deflation. Yes, people do believe weird things. In fact, I'm going to all 3/3 are deflationary. The first 2/3 are deflationary about what proportion of people really believe these weird things that we attribute to them. The last third is about, okay, but some people do believe weird things. Well, who? Well, at last count, more or less everybody, because if you pick out weirdness by content, we all have some pretty weird beliefs, and there's nothing very surprising or irrational about that. Irrationality is a big thing with me. Epistemic rationality, I claim there's a lot less epistemic irrationality around than either psychologists in the heuristics and biases tradition or naturalistic philosophers claim. Epistemic irrationality, I'm not defending a Gigerenzer ecological rationality line. Okay, that's background stuff. So I'm going to be examining this question through the lens of the asymmetry thesis. I don't know why I've got my bullet points coming up one at a time. I haven't rehearsed the talk so that I could actually use such a feature. So the asymmetry thesis is a controversial but widely held thesis that conservatives preferentially have weird beliefs. There are weird beliefs around, and they are found more on the right than the left, and this isn't a coincidence. This is, that is to say, there is some psychological explanation about why weird beliefs are found more on the right. Either being on the right causes you to have certain dispositions that make you credulous, or being credulous both disposes you to be on the right and to espouse these weird beliefs. And some of the evidence for the asymmetry thesis is very familiar. Newspapers are full of it. But so is academic research. Things like the claim that 24% of Republicans believe that Obama is the Antichrist. And you can think of QAnon, you can think of 5G conspiracy theories, you can think of microchips in the vaccines theories. These are not found exclusively on the right, but they are found more dominantly on the right. So why do people believe these weird things? And with the asymmetry thesis, which I'm happy to talk about some more in question time. Here it's just a hook. I'm not actually interested in the asymmetry thesis. I'm going to be presenting data here. Who's us? I think I've actually managed to obscure the picture of Rob Ross there, at least on my own screen. I'm seeing you instead, and Rob deserves to be seen. How do I return to normal view? You can tell that I've managed to get through the pandemic with very little zooming. I'm not as fluent at this as I should be. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting some of our own data. This is Rob Ross at Macquarie University, and Rob's a cognitive scientist. So when I say it's Rob Ross and I must emphasize that it's more him than me. So we've got lots and lots of data which nicely illustrates the asymmetry thesis. So for example, this is standard MTurk data, so largely American respondents. We asked them, do you agree with the following statement? A powerful and secretive group known as the New World Order is planning to eventually rule the world through an autonomous government, which would replace sovereign government. And you get this kind of distribution across lots of questions. So a peak on the left, but a higher peak on the right. This is self-identified political leaning. Strongly Democrat, you're getting some degree of credulity. Strongly Republican, you're getting a higher degree of credulity, and being a moderate is protective against credulity. SARS, this is actually pre-COVID data. SARS was engineered as a biological weapon, similar sort of distribution of responses. The Apollo moon landings were faked, less acceptance on the left. Now it's Republicans that espouse this theory. Barack Obama is the Antichrist. Again, this is not something we're asking because we came up with a question. That question was partly the inspiration for this research, reading survey evidence that said Republicans believe that Barack Obama is the Antichrist. That's kind of why we got into this in the first place. Okay, I could add further examples. So you're seeing that distribution that broadly supports the asymmetry thesis. Credulity on the left and the right, but predominantly on the right. Being a moderate, sensible center is protective against credulity. Well, maybe. Here's some more data. The US agencies intentionally created the AIDS epidemic and administered it to Black and gay men in the 1970s. Again, not something we created for ourselves. This is a fairly commonly espoused conspiracy theory. Now you're seeing acceptance just as strongly on the left as the right. Area 51 contains secretive US base containing crashed UFO spacecraft and or alien bodies, accepted more strongly on the left than the right. Although surprisingly high levels of endorsement across all groups. Donald Trump is the Antichrist. You're getting the reverse image of the Obama is the Antichrist. Surprisingly strong acceptance of that claim on the far right of our sample. So you may take this kind of data to instead support a symmetry thesis. You might think the reason why we're seeing data supporting asymmetry is a function of the questions that people are being asked. So Keith Stanovich, in his new book, which has some unfortunate bits to it, nevertheless has some early chapters in which he argues that a lot of psychology is biased against conservatives. Stanovich is very clearly a conservative himself. And the arguments are quite convincing that scales, for example, that attribute bad reasoning predominantly to conservatives fail to control for differences in background beliefs. And if you take them into account, a lot of the effects just go away. He's very convincing on some of these scales, worth taking seriously, if less convincing on others. And then he kind of loses the plot towards the end. So you might take our data to support something like that. Maybe evidence of asymmetry is really just reflecting the left-wing bias in psychology. It's not the moral I want to draw. One more piece of data. The Australian Defence Force has been secretly developing an elite army of genetically engineered warrior kangaroos to invade neighboring countries. Getting a nice asymmetry style response here. Republicans all over that, yep, that sounds very plausible to me. Again, you're getting a peak on the far left and being a moderate protective. Here's the thing, we made this up. We don't believe anybody sat down thinking, finally, a chance to tell people what I really believe about the killer kangaroo theory. They were encountering this for the very first time. We have absolutely no doubt at all. Now, you might think, and I'll say something more about why something like this isn't entirely false. You might think some people encounter a question like that and think, well, I never thought of that. Yeah, that sounds like it probably is true. I now believe it. I'm not really worried about the killer kangaroos. We doubt that's the most plausible explanation of what's going on here. We doubt very strongly that people generally, or that people who are likely to report belief in such a conspiracy theory or in such a bizarre belief sincerely are expressing what they take their own beliefs to be. We think it's far more likely they're engaging in some kind of trolling or pranking. If you ask what is very obviously on the face of it, either a stupid question, which looks like it's designed to probe respondents' credulity, or a question which respondents suspect is politically charged, you are going to get some results, some participants responding not to answer the question, but to tell you, in effect, what they think about the question. We're not, this is not pure speculation. As I said, this is an MTurk sample. MTurk samples are acceptable in psychological science. They're publishable samples. There's a lot of empirical work on them. They find that, in general, MTurk workers, as they're called, provide data that's reasonably high quality. In general, it's no worse than the standard kind of sample psychologists tended to use before MTurk, which was undergraduates answering questions for course credit, typically. And in fact, it has certain advantages. It's much cheaper, which means you can very easily scale up. A lot of the one reason we're seeing problems of replication is a lot of work. Work in the 70s is really appalling. Standard to have 10 participants. Now, even in pilot work like this, we're running 500 people. So you're getting more reliability or more replicability just from sheer power. But because it's an MTurk sample, we can go to Reddit and look at the MTurk discussions where MTurk workers talk about the psychological experiments they participate in. And we know full well that they're seeing biases in them. They take themselves to see biases in them. So we know full well that they talk about the results. So we don't think this is at all ungrounded speculation. The MTurk sample, in the American sample, one reason why we wouldn't use it for a full-scale study, or tend not to use it, is that it's not representative of demographically. You do get, for example, a more educated sample than a population representative one. So we wouldn't use MTurk for a lot of questions where it's important to get a representative sample. So it's not at all unlikely that you're seeing people responding by trolling what they see as the liberal experimenters, rightly insofar as the demographics of psychology is concerned, or engaging in sheer pranking, because after all, this kind of work is fairly boring. And making your own fun is not at all unlikely. So Scott Alexander, the blogger, has proposed what he calls a lizard man constant. So you know David Icke's lizard man conspiracy theory, according to lizard people are secretly controlling the world. It's often cited as an example of just how crazy conspiracy theorists are. Scott Alexander suggests that 4% of people are going to say yes to lizard man questions, come what may, because 4% of people are just going to engage in trolling or pranking. I'd be very, very surprised if there's such a thing as a lizard man constant. I suspect the rate of insincere responding is much higher in some context. It's going to be context and sample dependent. So that's one thing happening, pranking and trolling. There's another thing going on. You probably encountered this experiment before. This is quite a well-known one. This is not our own work. This is Schaffner and Lukes. So they took advantage of the then live controversy, confected controversy, I guess, over Trump's inauguration. So you'll remember in 2016, or maybe you're lucky enough not to remember, Sean Spicer, the then press secretary for Trump, made the claim that Trump's inauguration was the biggest ever seen. And that was clearly false. The picture on the right is Obama's inauguration in 2012. The picture on the left is Trump's inauguration. You only have to look at the photo to see that the claim was false, and there were plenty of other reasons to think it was false. It's this controversy that led to Kellyanne Conway coming up with the notorious term alternative facts, defending Sean Spicer. She said, well, they may be the facts, but he was presenting the alternative facts, which is, I guess, the facts that apply in Twin Earth. So Schaffner and Luke showed their respondents these photos, and they simply asked them, which photo has more people? They didn't identify them. They were taking advantage of the fact that the controversy was then recent, very recent, and people would be able to identify the photo many people be able to identify the photos as the inauguration photos and know what they're being asked. What are they being asked? Well, on the face of it, they're being asked which photo has more people. Is that the question they answered? Probably not. At least many of them didn't. People who reported voting for Trump, but not people who reported voting for Clinton or who reported not voting at all, were significantly more likely to pick photo A as having more people in it. Not zero, but well below 2% of people who were either Clinton supporters or non-voters picked photo A as having the bigger crowd. Maybe perceptual mechanisms are cognitively penetrable, and supporting Donald Trump leads you to see crowds as, crowd photos as depicting more people. It's extremely unlikely. It's far more likely that people are engaged in some kind of inference. What they're being asked about these pictures of the inauguration, and they take the opportunity either to tell the experimenter what they think of them. You really think I'm that credulous? Well, I'm going to just troll your survey. Or they simply report, they take the opportunity to express their support for Trump. They pick photo A, not because they take it to depict a bigger crowd, but to express their support for Trump. There's quite a bit of experimental evidence that support the view that expressive responding is common on politically charged questions. It's somewhat controversial. Not every attempt to replicate expressive responding has been successful. But it's widely accepted that some people engage not in answering the question, but in expressing their support for their side. So, for example, this is most widely used methodology, I believe, is testing partisan worlds. So Democrats and Republicans report different perceptions of how the country is going on factual questions. They report different perceptions of inflation and unemployment and growth rates, for example, leading political psychologists to say they live in different worlds. However, incentivizing accuracy typically has a big effect on the degree of partisan bias on response. People incentivized to report true beliefs are much less likely to give a response that reflects their support for their side of politics. And also, this seems to be dose dependent. Bigger incentives. Incentives here is usually money. Bigger incentives leads to more accurate reporting. One common criticism of this work is it may not be leading people to report their true beliefs. It may instead be leading people to report what they think will get them the money. So they know that psychologists tend to be liberals. They think the mainstream media are getting the facts wrong, but the liberals will buy those facts. Therefore, they report not what they believe, but what they think the mainstream media is reporting. We avoided, or at least minimized this problem by using a different methodology. What we did is we asked people to predict in early January who will be inaugurated on the 21st January. So you remember Trump was engaging in legal challenge after legal challenge. Those legal challenges had failed by the date of our study. But Trump was still saying, and some of his supporters were still saying, I will be inaugurated president on the 21st of January. So we asked our respondents to make a prediction, and we incentivized them for accuracy in one condition. We told them that after the inauguration, we'll draw 3 names, and people who got it right, from those who got it right, and those 3 names will each get a $100 Amazon voucher. And the manipulation was successful. Trump supporters were significantly more likely to say that Trump was going to be inaugurated president on January 21st in the unincentivized condition than in the incentivized condition. So that looks like it minimizes worry about reporting what we think is the case rather than what they think is actually the case. So there's trolling, pranking, there's expressive responding, there's also use of partisan heuristics. A significant proportion of a very high proportion of responses to these kinds of questions are constructed on the spot. People don't have pre-existing beliefs. Most people don't follow politics all that carefully. After all, we know from the empirical evidence that most people can't name a single Supreme Court justice. Most people can't name the party that controls Congress, and so forth. So ask these questions, they don't dredge their memory, but instead they engage in some kind of inference. Now, one thing you can be doing here is to simultaneously be asking yourself, what do the people engaged in politics, what are they like? And what are the kinds of things they're likely to do? And why am I being asked this question? So suppose you ask your respondents, is Obama a secret Muslim? You don't know much about Obama, you know you don't like him and you don't like Muslims. So you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't know, but he's a pretty bad character, he could well be. And then you add to that, well, why am I being asked this question? People are engaged in, pragmatics all the time. They're engaged in this explicitly, they're engaged in it implicitly all the time. They assume they're being asked a question for some reason. Why is the question got that content? And a plausible inference is I'm being asked this question because it's a live issue. People are talking about it, or there's a rumor going around. So you may well answer that question, not because you have any pre-existing belief that Obama is a Muslim, but because you're prompted to think, well, if people are saying that, and he's a pretty nasty character, and then Muslims are pretty nasty, so, it probably yes. You're going to get even higher results if you construct your surveys badly. And a lot of these kinds of questionnaires, including too many by academic researchers, are not well constructed. It's even possible to cynically suspect that people are trying to get themselves into, the Atlantic, the New York Times, by inflating the rates of response. I did a survey recently, which was particularly bad. I won't tell you the questions, I won't out anybody, but here were my options on politically charged questions. Strongly agree, moderately agree, moderately disagree, strongly disagree. Those are my options. I don't have a neutral option. I don't have a don't know option. I've got to take a side. And I can't go on if I don't choose an option, computer-based. I can't click the forward option. That's very likely to, so if I'm think, well, I don't know, I may well pick moderately agree to the answer that favors my side. You're going to inflate the use of partisan heuristics and belief reports through this kind of method. That's quite unusual, but providing a neutral or even worse, a don't know option is good evidence that that all by itself inflates response compared to what's sometimes called a soft don't know option. A soft don't know option allows you to skip the question. You don't have to take any stance at all, and you don't have to report ignorance. People don't like reporting ignorance. If you allow skipping, you get lower rates of reporting belief in various conspiracies compared to requiring people to report something. So, I just want to ask people to take these reports with more than one grain of salt. Questions about UFOs, questions about the credulity of Americans, which the media loves to report, probably reflect in part the fact that so much the work happens in America, and in part the fact that surveys are badly designed, thereby inflate responses. Respondents don't take them seriously at anything like the rates we would hope they do. They get bored. They know full well what they're being asked often, and they're going to respond accordingly in some unknown fraction of cases. We actually ask people, did you respond sincerely? Once you start wondering whether people are being insincere, of course, the worry is corrosive, but a fairly high proportion, I think about 12% of people said that they answered at least one question insincerely. So, I think we should be deflating our worries about weird beliefs. All right, that's the first 2/3. Having spent this time deflating it, I now want to actually answer the question. First of all, actually, I think I had a little bit more on this topic. So how do you test for sincerity? This Herman Cain Award you may have heard about might be taken as a badge of sincerity. Herbert Cain Award is awarded to people who publicly opposed vaccines and then died from COVID. You may say that's a marker of belief. Even here, I suspect it's not a wonderful marker. Think about expressive responding and incentives. One reason why I'm not willing to put a figure on it, even though I've got no doubt that the lizard man constant is understated, is one of the things you do by providing an incentive is provide an opportunity for a stronger signal. If I ask you, to betray your football team, I won't make it, something that's a genuinely sacred value. For $10, maybe, stand up and say Manchester United forever, or when you're a Gunner supporter, or whatever it might be, you may actually regard that incentive, turning down that incentive, as an opportunity to display your support for Arsenal even more strongly. Whereas there'd be some incentive such that you think, well, it's now worth it to me. With something that is a sacred value. We know that people are extremely reluctant to trade off financial incentives for expressions of a lack of support. In fact, they're incensed by the very suggestion that they would trade off mere money for, their love of country. So the fact that you may believe the vaccines work, and you may simply take that as an opportunity for a stronger signal of opposition to Biden and Fauci. Especially given, if you really have, rational beliefs, that the vaccines are only, reduce your risk somewhat relative to baseline. So you may think it's worth your risk. If you think it's worth the risk to your health to, climb the outside of a building to plant a flag on the second floor, and lots of people do, you may well think that it's worth the risk to your health of not getting a vaccine to express your opposition to liberal intelligentsia. There are people like Edgar Madison Welch. He's the guy who turned up at Comet Pizza in DC to free the child slaves, is how he put it. He apparently believed the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, according to which Democrats were keeping children for abusive purposes in the basement of a DC pizzeria. Such people do exist, but that degree of credulity is probably very rare. In his book, Not Born Yesterday, Hugo Messier talks about the rumor that's swept Orléans in the late 60s, according to which Jewish shopkeepers were kidnapping, good Christian girls to sell them into slavery. Anti-Semitism and children are very common themes in these rumors. And Messier points out that the height of the rumor, people who believed it or said they believed it would stop and stare at the shops in question. Just think about how out of keeping with a justifiable response to genuine kidnapping of children and selling them into slavery is stopping and staring at the shops. They didn't even report them to police. A better explanation is that they didn't. Messier thinks these are reflective beliefs. I suspect they're simply not sincere beliefs at all. That's not to say they're not epistemically harmful. They have a variety of bad epistemic effects, including, flooding the zone with nonsense, as Bannon put it, causing people to consult certain sources and not others. They may lead people to be mistaken about their own beliefs. I think there are a range of bad epistemic effects, but I doubt very much that most people espousing these things are sincere. All right, finally, that last third. First thing to say about weird beliefs is they're not all that weird. We all accept beliefs that are counterintuitive, have a bizarre content. If you're a religious believer, you certainly do. The belief in the Trinity is in some way a weird belief. But if you're not a religious believer, you accept some pretty weird things too. Quantum mechanics is pretty damn weird. evolution by natural selection is pretty damn weird. We know, I mean, there's lots of experimental evidence that people find it highly counterintuitive, evolution by natural selection. We know that just ordinary Newtonian physics conflicts with folk intuitions about how objects move. All of this is weird. Why do we accept it? I hope we do. Okay, here's the very rapid story, which I tell in Bad Beliefs. We are designed to be credulous animals. Why are we designed to be credulous animals? Because we're epistemically social animals. Our success as cognitive beings, no, further, our success as reproductive beings, our evolutionary success, given we are animals with a culture, depends on cultural technologies which we can't invent for ourselves. They're inherited. And inherited from people who may have played a part in further developing them, as may we, but who themselves couldn't invent them. Not only couldn't they invent them, but very often they couldn't fully understand them. They may have been developed at timescales beyond human memory, and they may encode responses to problems that the person won't encounter, and that won't be encountered because they're things that are not encountered at timescales of single generations. Things like food preparation technologies, which are often highly counterintuitive. Many staple foods, because they have nutritional value, also evolve toxins to protect them against predation. So they've got to be detoxified. The detoxification processes are often many stages long. Worse, they're not obvious that they need it at all because the toxins don't kill very rapidly at all. They may take years to kill. The cultures develop counterintuitive detoxification processes to respond to challenges that individuals don't even know they face. Given all that, food preparation technologies just being one example, we developed adaptations to accept testimony. Not just, we're not credulous, we accept testimony from people we think are epistemically well-placed. Which, for example, we accept testimony from the majority of people in our culture, so long as we have no special reason to think they're incompetent or malevolent. So we're designed to be credulous. We're designed to accept counterintuitive beliefs on testimony. And we should therefore expect we will accept and act on the testimony that we receive, regardless of how counterintuitive its content is. I think a better question, or a more interesting question, might be, why don't people believe weird things? How did the first, it's probably 80% and 20%, how did the first 80% of the paper and the last 20% fit together? Why aren't people more credulous? And that's a question that I'm not sure of the answer to. Why is it that a lot of people are insincere when they report their lizard man beliefs, or their Obama is a secret Muslim belief, or Area 51 and so forth? And I suspect the answer probably is very good news about who people actually trust as sources of testimony. Yes, they may trust Trump on certain political questions, but they don't trust him when his testimony is about a factual matter and it conflicts with the testimony of genuine epistemic authorities. They say they trust him, but they don't at anything like the rate they claim to. So we're credulous, but we're not as credulous as all that, neither left nor right. We do accept weird things, but it requires epistemic authorities say so before we do so. Okay, thank you. I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Thank you for a really rich talk. And